think we're going to go ahead and get started, and anybody else can just kind of jump right in. So, hello everyone. Welcome to lesson 3 of the art classes here at the library. Today our lessons are going to be on shading, lighting, texture, and color. So, kind of doing finalized touches to any piece that you'd be working on. So, first thing I'm going to go over is some color wheel things. So we're going to go over how to use the color wheel and how to best pick your colors of what you would like to go on your characters. So with the color wheel, you have about 12 different colors that are roughly on the color wheel. And 3 of them are going to be primary colors, which would be the red, blue, and yellow. That's going to be the colors that you would use to mix every other color on the color palette. And then you can add a little bit of each primary color together, and then you would get your secondary colors. So if you mixed red to yellow, you're going to get orange. If you mixed yellow and blue, you're going to get green, and blue to red, you're going to get purple. And if you would mix the color of one primary color and one secondary color, you're going to get just a slight shade difference between the two. So if you did red with orange, it would be a reddish orange. Orange to yellow would be a yellow orange, and vice versa all the way around the color wheel. So with those colors would be called tertiary colors, which would be adding the one primary to one secondary color. And that would basically give you all of your color wheel. So when you're doing shading and lighting, I found the best way to do this would be with props and actual lighting sources. So I brought a little figure today, and I'm going to show you basically how you're going to look up different ways of how you're going to shade this character. And let me pull up lighting because I forgot to bring one. So I'm going to show you a couple different ways how to do the lighting on the character. So on the paper, I kind of showed a couple different places of where the lighting could be coming from. Like this one would be from up high. So if you wanted to match that to the character you're working on, you could shine it off to the side. So that would be lit on the back side of the arm, a little bit underneath of the arm, but the part that's going to be getting the most light would be the center, and this side of the face would be a lot more dark. Hello, welcome. And same with the lower half of the shoulder, because everything you're going to be shading is going to be being blocked by something. So this half of the head is not getting any light, this half of the neck's not getting any light, but the head is blocking the light that would be on the shoulder, and same with the chest, it'd be blocking out the light from there. And then the underside of this arm is going to be not lit because the top side of this arm will get all the light. And then if you wanted to do the second half where the light would be coming from below, if this was a separate piece, you can see how that changes where the light would be coming from. So if the light was coming from a low angle, it would be kind of the same, but the light would be shifting just a little bit, or the shadows would be shifting a little bit differently than the top half of it. And it'd be coming almost angled down towards the light instead of up towards the light this way. And then if you were going to go from the opposite side, so now all your shadows are going to be reversed if all the light was coming from the opposite side, from up higher. It's going to change where the shading would be and the lighting of the character. And where the light is coming from is very important for when you're coloring and shading in your character, because it gives the character a lot of depth instead of being so flat. And then if you're down below from this angle, the low light would be on the opposite sides. But that's basically how you're going to go over shading, so you can see a lot more of how the light plays with the characters. So for going into creating texture, texture is created in a lot of different ways. I found one of the best ways to represent texture is usually through creating like fur textures in animals, through a technique that's called feathering. So I'm actually going to use it on this side of the paper. So when you're doing a feathering technique, you're going to hold the pencil. I usually hold it back further, so you're going to hold it about mid pencil, and you're going to do usually just the 3 fingers. And it's very quick movements. You're not going to use a lot of thumb. It's just kind of to hold the pencil, but you're mostly using the index and the middle finger to hold the pencil. But it would be just very quick movements. They don't have to be very precise, but that usually gives you very good fur control. And you don't want to so much do straight lines and make sure that all the strokes that you do match each other. If you did a couple different shorter lines that go a little bit longer, lines that start back a little bit further, it gives the texture a lot more depth to it than just a bunch of straight lines in a row. And feel free to move the paper any direction you need to. It can go any direction that you need to make sure that you can get that angle. So if you needed to curve it off to the other side, you can always turn your paper upside down and go backwards and go up. Instead of pulling it down, you would go up, flicking your pencil up. So to show you how to do some fur texture, with animals, their fur usually goes in a very specific direction. So with like the cheeks, which would be right here on the character, they're usually going to go up. So you do some feathering up. And then with the ears at the top of the head, the hair is going to split between going one direction to up to the opposite direction. And same with the ears, they're going to go up on both sides. Then when it would come to the neck fur, the neck's going to go down. So you just do some feathering down. And it's going to give you a nice texture around for the fur. And shoulder blades would also be going down. And the tail would be also going out. And this can be a same texture that you would use for like doing hair on characters, or combined with the feathering, you can also do actual like triangles and do better hair shape over a hair texture to add feathering in with it. If you wanted to create like more spiky, or like this would be more of a realistic texture over a more cartoon styled character. So mixing some colors. When mixing colors, I kind of already went over it a little bit with the color wheel, but adding reds to the violet, blue, green, yellow, orange, or red, you're gonna get a wider spectrum of colors over just the red. So you would end up with a darker violet when you would match it to violet, and a more purplish, adding it to blue. Almost like an orangish, almost with green, a little bit more orange with the yellow, reddish orange tone with the orange. And then you can see where adding certain colors changes it to a different color that's already on the wheel. Like when you add yellow to blue, you kind of get the green. And then when you add white to those colors, obviously it's going to lighten up the color. And same with if you add dark or add black, it's going to darken that color. So those are good techniques to lighten or darken a color. If you say only have 12 colors in your pencils, you're going to be able to use different colors to layer over top of them to change what colors you have. So actually, I think we're going to go right into coloring. So I don't know how many of you brought a drawing to color in today, because I'm going to go straight, instead of teaching you how to draw something, I'm going to teach you how to color something. So I'm going to get my reference of the colors. So you can either use the drawing that we did from last week, or if you brought a different color or a different drawing that you'd like to color, either one will be acceptable. You don't have to follow them exactly, but it will show you how to color these. So when you're creating your colors for your piece, you want to figure out what colors you think are going to look best. So what I typically tend to do is I will go through my pencils, and I will, or if I have markers, which I usually work with markers, but I'm working with pencils today, but I would go through on a separate piece of paper and kind of see what colors I actually have when they're on the paper, so that I know what colors I actually am wanting to use with the characters. So this is the one I'll probably use. So usually when you're picking your colors, you're going to want a light color and a dark color of the same color. So you would have a lighter, say you wanted to use orange, you would get a lighter orange and a darker orange, because the darker orange is going to be used for when you do your shading. Alright. Alright. So when you're starting out with what you're wanting to color, you would go over your, well, you'd want to figure out exactly what things you want what color. So I already know that the robe that she's wearing is going to be a lot darker than everything else. So I would just kind of go in very lightly with the color I want it to be, which is going to be a darker brown. If you want to see this character, so you can see the finished process. And when you're coloring, try to make sure that all your strokes and circles or whatever it is whatever technique you use to color in are all going the same direction. So you don't want to start coloring opposite direction from what you started with, because then it's going to look very stroke heavy, at least until the end. Once you have your base, which would be called flat colors in, then you can go back over in the opposite direction after you're happy with how your colors look, to give it a little bit stronger color and make it a little bit more opaque than sheer, how it is kind of right now. So it's going to be very, very light colors right now. And also a good technique for, especially when you're getting into learning how to color well, is what I'll do is sometimes I'll just go over the character and I'll figure out what colors want to be where. So I'll just mark a little bit in specific, because you can break down your character into the drawing into where the lines are fully closed off. So like the sleeve is completely closed off from anything else on here. So I would just put a little bit of a mark there to know what color I want to make that when I get to that sleeve. And so that way I know I don't want this sleeve to be the lighter color or the darker color. Whichever color you want it to be, just make a little marker, make a little note somewhere so you know exactly where you want that color to go when you get to that portion of your character. So normally when I'm drawing, I will usually finish one section of color at a time. So like I would normally, if I was doing the robe, I would finish the robe, but I'm gonna show you how adding the shadows to it afterwards will change how it'll look instead of just the flat coloring. So I'm gonna go ahead and move on to her tunic that she would have on, which is gonna be a slightly lighter, like tan color. And then with skin tones, if you don't have a very good skin tone, you can take like a pink, which is, this one's not quite a bright pink, but it's a more salmony kind of colored pink, and just do that very, very lightly over the character, like almost barely putting any pressure onto it, because if you go too dark with a skin tone, it's going to be very evident that it's not quite a skin tone. And when you're working on very fine, detailed spots like eyes, you want to make sure your pencil's as sharp as possible. So when you're going over black areas, I typically do not just straight color black onto the character, because when you do a lot of black, it's going to remove a lot of detail. So what I actually do when I'm doing black coloring is I will take a gray or just a regular pencil, and I will start with a gray base color. because you can always add more black. It's harder to take away more black to give it detail. Plus, when you're looking at something very dark and black, usually the highlights of it, where the light's shining on it the most, is going to look almost more gray than black even. And for this belt, I'm doing it a little bit different than what this one is, but I'm gonna use the same color I used for the tunic, but I want to make it a little bit darker because the belt I want to stand out a little bit more, so I'm gonna make it just a little bit darker by pushing just a little bit harder on the pencil. Not a whole lot, but just enough that you can tell you've made it a different color. And then the inside of it's going to be brown. All right. So at this point, we're going to start going over how to create a lot more depth with the character by adding shading and lighting. So what I'm going to do is the lighting is going to be coming from directly above the character, which means that most of the shadows are going to be from below the character, so all the shadows are going to be facing upwards. And so I'm going to take a just slightly darker brown than what I did going into the colors. And wherever you have a fold in your character, that's usually going to add a bit of shadow. So with the character like on her sleeve where she has a lot more folds in the sleeve, you're going to figure out what part of that sleeve would be going like folding over the other portion, because that part is going to cast a bit of a shadow over the other part of that fold. And just start going over and adding a little bit of a dark shadow underneath of those lines. the inside of the sleeve, we'll probably get a bit of shadow along the whole side of the sleeve. So you're gonna do a little bit of shadow by where the wrist is, and then shadow it, just do a little bit darker around the whole inside of the arm, because that's gonna create a lot more shadow. And if there's a part of the outfit that you would be doing that you know is going to be a lot darker than just even the folds in the clothes, like the inside of the sleeve will probably have almost no light at all. So you're going to want to just go ahead and make that as dark as you can. And then when it comes to where the hair would be covering the sleeve up a little bit, you would probably cast a shadow onto the cloak as well. So you're going to do just a little bit of a darker color underneath of the hair as well, because that hair is going to cast a bit of a shadow as well. And same with on the shoulder where the hood would be covering it, it's going to be casting a bit of a shadow. And most likely the lowest part of all of the clothing will be having a shadow underneath or on the lowest part of it. So like the bottom of the cloak, you're gonna have a shadow across the whole bottom of the character. Then when it would come to like the inside of her cloak, it's going to probably be a lot darker because that's getting the least amount of light. So like especially up by like the very inside of the cloak, you're gonna do it a lot darker. And with the inside of the cloak, I kind of did what's called a gradient, which is you start with the darkest point and kind of lighten it as you go down or up or whichever way, kind of like a sunrise, where it's going to be orangish into like a yellow. So it'll gradient into a different color, or in this case, a lighter version of the same color. So once it gets to about the hips of the character, I'm just going to start lessening the pressure I have so that it starts to not be as dark when I get down to the bottom, because the whole inside is going to be darker than what the outside of this cloak is going to be. But not quite as dark as what the top of it's going to be. And same with the folds. If you find folds, it's going to be even darker in those areas than it is even in where it's already darker at. So now that I have the whole outside of the cloak colored in and then shadowed, what I'm gonna do, because I want the color of the cloak to be a little less brown, you can mix a little bit of colors, which I'm gonna mix a little bit of the color I used on the tunic to just kind of go back over even into the shadows. You're just going to kind of re-base color the whole cloak or whatever portion it is you're wanting to color, to just lighten that color or change that color up a little bit. So the next color I'm gonna go over would probably be the black, because with the blacks, basically you're going to say that your main color, even though your main color is black, black is going to be your highlight color for black being the main color. So with the hair, because I colored it in gray, that would be the base color. And you're gonna use the black like shadow or highlight to that. Because if you do too much black, it's gonna be very, very dark and you're gonna lose a lot of definition. So like when I'm doing the hair, I'm gonna usually pick one side or the other of the strands to just kind of pick which one I feel like needs to have more black. And usually it would be the lower half, but I'm gonna leave more gray visible than any of the black. And usually it depends on which way your light's coming from, which strand would have more gray, because your gray is going to be the highlight and your black's going to be your undertone or your shadow. And I use a feathering technique when I'm doing this, because the black, especially with hair, is going to be more throughout, but you don't want to lose all that definition for the hair. So I usually do a bit of a feathering technique when I'm doing like a very dark brown hair or dark black hair. Because with dark browns, you can kind of unintentionally get the same effect when you're working with very heavy black, is you'll lose a lot of definition when you're working with anything very dark. Same with even dark blues. You'll get very unintentionally lose definition when you're doing too much of one color. And then what I usually do at the end is I'll go over the character's hair very, very lightly with the black so that it will darken up what gray is there. But like I said, you really don't want to try to lose all that definition, so just very, very lightly to just make that dark or that gray just a little bit darker if you want to do that. And then what I like about going in with colored pencils is if you feel like you got a little too dark in one area, you can always lighten it up with an eraser. Now with the gloves, they're going to be a lot different than the hair. The hair, you can just kind of throw the color in a little bit wherever you'd like to. But with the gloves, it's going to be more like the clothing, where you want to intentionally place where you want your black to go. So like under the fingers, give me a second, I need to sharpen my pencil again. So like under the side of the fingers, and I would do along the side. And what I usually do when I'm working with black is I do the gradient, where I do a little bit of black and just kind of lessen my pressure to where it just lightly will fade into a gray instead of a very harsh black line. and then leave most of the glove at a gray tone. And then you can always go in and add a little bit more black around the very edges of it. But leaving the more gray shows more definition in the hand or wherever it is you're drawing the black. Now, with the addition of the lightsaber, that brings in a second light source. So, along with the light that would be above her head, there's going to be a little bit of a light, a more soft light coming from the lightsaber itself. So, show you how to do that. The lightsaber is going to have a very white center because it's very bright, with just a little bit of an edge of where the actual color of the lightsaber would be. So you're going to, I have it just in pencil so I can see where the color is going to be, but I'll probably erase the lines there that I have set for myself. But you're going to do just a little bit of whatever color you wanted to make it, which I'm going to do mine green. And you're going to leave a little bit of white in the center and then do more green on the opposite side, or the other side of the lightsaber, so that you can see a bit of a soft glow. And I'll just erase those lines, which will also soften that light again. And because of the light from the lightsaber, I'll darken it a little bit so you can see, it's going to cast a little bit of light onto the hand and her sleeve. So that would be called a rim lighting. And so on the parts that you did a little bit more gray on the lightsaber, you're just going to add a little bit more green to the gray that you did on her hand for the glove, because you'll be able to see a little bit of green on the glove and a little bit on the sleeve. Not too much though, just enough up her arm, about this much, to where you can see a little bit of green coming from the glow of the lightsaber. And then with the tunic, you're gonna do the same thing that you did with the robe, where the robe, where you would just do the low lights. think what I'm gonna do with the tunic is I'm gonna add a little bit of a pink color over it. Or instead of, if you don't want to add a different color over whatever it is you're drawing, what you would do is whatever color you used as the base color, and then the darker color used for the shadow, you would go over the whole thing again with that first color just a little bit darker so that you can kind of blend that shadow into the first color you started. We're getting pretty low on time. So does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? When you're doing the facial color scheme, you're usually going to use the pink or the tan color that you would have picked for the facial features and just darken them up just a little bit. Usually it's going to be a little bit darker around clothes, hair, underneath of the neck. It's going to be a little bit darker in those areas. The chin line's usually going to be a little bit darker. It's going to be a little bit darker under the lips, around the nose, a little bit under the eyes, and anywhere where the hair would be covering. I didn't get to the boots or the belt, but that's basically all the tips and tricks that would be most helpful for going over the color schemes and how to color your characters. So, any questions before we get off here? All right. Well, next week we're going to be going over costume design. So if you would like to, you can still bring colored pencils if you wanted to try coloring any of your character in or using them as construction lines, but we're probably going to mostly go over pencil and drawing different costumes on your character next week. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining this week, and I will see you all next week then. Thank you so much.